about, feeling gratitude for being busy, no matter what in any season. And something I realized recently, kind of cheesy, but it worked for me. Um, I'm doing a version of a 75 hard right now. So I'm
Oh,
walk.
nice.
I say a version because I'm not eating any unnecessary carbs. I'm eating high protein, a lot of red meat, protein shakes, all that, and then I'm also doing two workouts. And I was like, it hit me over a week ago. I was like, oh, I have to work out. I have to work out. I kept saying that. I'm like, no, no, no. I get to work out. And
Yes,
when you reframe your mind to look at things like, no, 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 I'm privileged to do that. I get to do that. I have more pep in my step when I think of things like that. So to kind of what you're saying, that's kind of the same.
absolutely. It's a great reframe. And one other thing that I heard recently is that it's impossible to be grateful and angry at the same time. So
100%.
one issue that I deal with is I often feel this like frustration and this anxiety, but just bringing it back to what you're thankful for, it just very quickly takes me away from all those sort of negative emotions and helps
Yeah.
me focus.
Yeah, and we like, our minds are engineered to protect us from bad things. Like that's why we have a lot of fear, right? It's
Hmm.
like someone said this to me once. How often does the worst possible outcome actually happen?
Right,
It's not. It does. It just doesn't. It just doesn't.
right.
Right. So just remember that. And then there's people, man. There's people dealing with much bigger issues than you and I are. So at the end of the day,
100%.
our issues are very small. So. Uh,
Yes.
well, cool, man. Hey, I appreciate you taking the time here. So,
Likewise.
yeah, I want to kick it off. You and I have had a lot of conversations. For those of you that don't know, this is kind of crazy. Lenny and I are both from. I mean, shoot, man, we grew up like 15, 20 minutes apart from each other on the
Right.
West Coast. Had no idea, and now we both live in Houston. So pretty wild. You went to a rival high school of mine through
Yes.
sports and everything, man. You guys always kicked our butt. You guys were great. I remember we played you guys in a high school my sophomore year. I was playing quarterback on varsity, and you guys whooped us in a playoff game. So at Westview, so that's my memory of your school.
Yeah, I mean, if it makes you feel any better, I had nothing to do with that.
Exactly. What grad year were you again?
I was 2016.
26. Okay, I was 15. So
Yes, pretty
that's
much the
cool.
same boat, very similar areas of Portland, Oregon, and now similar areas of Houston, Texas.
Yeah, yeah.
Wild.
Pretty cool. Pretty cool. So most entrepreneurs they see lawyers as people who show up when something goes wrong. That's how I always saw it. Like before we bought a business, I was like, do we need an attorney? And then when we started talking to him, like, yeah, we just need to fit the bill and just do it because she found the attorney we had. She found so many things that we wouldn't have seen, right? That's how a lot of people think of attorneys. It's like I'm just gonna get one when something goes bad. But you built Sun Law to be more strategic than reactive. What do founders misunderstand most about the role a good lawyer should play in building a company?
For sure. One thing you've heard me say before is that it's accurate to say that we're part of the legal industry, but it may be more accurate and perhaps more comprehensive to say that we're actually part of the strategic industry, right? So, just as a bit of background, I'm an artist, advocate, and attorney, which kind of gives me a more multifaceted view of the legal field, right? And so I built Sun Law, which is kind of for young entrepreneurs, by young entrepreneurs, to be not just a one-stop shop for all your business legal needs, right? That could be incorporation, contracts, compliance, you name it. But even more so than that, it's kind of having a trusted friend or advisor in your corner to help with brainstorming, to help with planning, to help with understanding really not just what's immediately in front of you, but what's next. So that's how I think of a what separates a good lawyer from a great lawyer, right? It's the proactivity, right? As far as startups go, legal work can and very much should be proactive rather than damage control, right? If it gets to that point, it's still better to have a lawyer than not. But really, legal considerations should be in the conversation long before your entity is even formed. Because everything from your choice of entity to how to structure your founding team to the potential compliance you'd need to be aware of depending on your industry, right? All of these things are important from day zero. So it's more than you come to us and we dispense a document, right? You come to us and we talk about real strategy, where we're going, what we need to do, and when, right? The practicalities of it all. So that's just, I could go on for days about this topic, but I think that's a pretty good start.
Yeah. And you left a traditional legal track and you built a law firm designed specifically for founders. I know kind of a certain age group, right? What was the moment where you realized the traditional legal model just wasn't built for entrepreneurs?
Yes, I love this question, and I'm going to start with the premise that the traditional legal model isn't built for pure entrepreneurs, both on the inside and on the outside. So what I mean by that is from both the employee perspective as well as the client perspective. And this is obviously a nuanced topic, so I'm necessarily going to have to make some generalizations, right, for the sake of answering concisely. But bear with me, right? So starting from what it looks like as an employee, like I started off my career in big law, and what happens is I kind of categorize people as grinders and hustlers, right? And some people are both, some people are neither, right? But just roughly speaking, what I mean by that is some people are really good at, if you tell them to do something, they can work on it for hours and hours and just get it done, right? And then, so those are the grinders, right? And then other people are really good at going out and meeting people and thinking big picture and creating business. Those are the hustlers. So certainly some people are really good at both, and of course other people who don't want to do either, right? But those aren't really the people we're talking about. Those aren't the people who go on to become entrepreneurs. Right. So what happens as a lower level associate at most, medium or larger law firms is that to survive the early years, it's really difficult to get away from strict hierarchies and a lot of grunt work. So in order to do well, you pretty much have to be a grinder. You can be a grinder and a hustler, but you have to be a grinder regardless. So there isn't much room for those of us who are more hustlers than grinders, right? Because even if you went out of your way to develop business, you wouldn't necessarily be rewarded for it, right? And it's just such a long game. It might be right for some, but it's often the wrong fit for many. And so for those lawyers who have that entrepreneurial drive early on and aren't afraid of a little risk, right? People like myself, they may be better off at least considering other options, something less traditional, such as a solo or boutique firm, a legal adjacent business, or whatever industry fancies your boat. Turning to the client perspective, right? As a founder, especially as more of a, let's say, small time entrepreneur running a very tight ship, it's really difficult to justify legal fees from a medium or large sized law firm, right? As we all know, it can get extremely pricey, extremely quick. Let's just say, for example, a partner with 20, 30 years experience, their billable rate could be 1,500 or 2 grand an hour, right? So if you want to just pick up the phone and talk to them for a quick chat, all of a sudden you're paying out the wazoo um, for something that, just for reference, you could come to us, that could be the cost of your entire package. So that just doesn't make sense, right? Especially for startups and small businesses with a team of, let's say, one or two or three people. Me myself, I've been part of quite a few ventures of this size, and most of which failed, but taught me critical lessons in business and law. But since I've seen it from the client perspective, I'm thinking, how would it possibly in any world make sense for me to get services from even like a medium-sized law firm, right? So we're going to be oftentimes foregoing legal services because we can't afford the traditional model. So just to bring it back to Sun Law, we're not the only ones doing this, but we're quite flexible in how we price because at the end of the day, we just want to make sure we're adding value at a rate that makes sense for, the little guys, so to speak,
Yeah,
right? And that's really where we kind of find ourselves just slightly outside of that traditional legal model.
that makes sense. And it's funny you mentioned attorney fees. I've got an advisor that he has a story where he was going through something. He had an attorney, and his attorney came to him and goes, "Hey, I was thinking about you over the weekend." And he goes, "Please don't do that. Please don't do that. I don't want to pay for that."
Oh my
So
goodness. That's a good.
but speaking of most founders, like myself, obsess over product, marketing, funding, but they treat legal as an afterthought. I used to, right? What are the top 2 to 3 legal mistakes you see founders make early that may come back to haunt them later?
Yeah, the big thing for me is not putting things in writing. And that in and of itself, I'm going to consider that two or three different mistakes because of the way that it can manifest
Hmm.
in different ways, right? For
Okay.
example, so we can categorize this as one mistake. So it's when your founding team doesn't have, let's say, a founder's agreement or something of that nature and just go off vibes. And that may be fine in the beginning, right? Let's say you start off as friends, everyone's aligned, everything's chill. But over time, things change, right? Maybe someone drops off, they start withdrawing a little bit. The months go by, they get busy with their life or other job, or they have a kid, or something like that, and it's just not rigorously defined what are the rights and obligations of each of the founding members when something like that happens, which it inevitably does. And I've seen this not only in my own previous ventures, I've seen this in my client stories, I've heard it from friends. It just happens so often. And that kind of thing eventually escalates to a point where there are founder breakups, right? And things get really messy, and that can quite literally sink the whole ship, especially
Mhm.
when it's like a two-person team, right? And one of the co-founders drops off. That can literally just end things before they really are able to take off.
Right.
So and then the other one I'll touch on real quickly is, let's say it's not between you and your founders, but it's between you and a business partner, right? And you have a deal that you want to pursue, and you think, hey, I'm cool with this person. Let's just do a handshake.
Right.
And and it's not even just about the very simple exchange of some amount of money for a service, right? It's it's usually a lot more complicated than that. The ways in which things go wrong, it's not just one person doesn't provide the money or one person doesn't provide the service. It's not usually that clear cut. There's a reason why contracts are written contracts are quite robust. They cover many different provisions across many different areas in which something could go wrong. And the nature of the dispute can oftentimes be very nuanced. And so when you don't have provisions that cover the 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 different contingencies, the different eventualities that could happen, that's really when things start to fall apart from that angle as well.
Right. Yeah. We've got an attorney within the entrepreneur lounge, and he likes to talk about, get your, kind of to what you're speaking of, get your operating agreement done at the beginning when you like each other, because one day you might not, right? So super
Absolutely.
important. Entrepreneurs often feel like they're building the plane while flying it. That's Matt and I have been in that phase before in our business many times.
Been there.
We're still in it at times. Um, what mindset shifts do founders need to make when they start thinking about risk, liability, and protecting what they're building? Kind of goes back to what we were just talking about a little bit.
Yeah, absolutely. And this was a big mindset shift for me as well, which there are times when it was difficult for me to price my services because
Hmm.
because I wasn't sure how much value I was providing. I wasn't even sure how to quantify it. The mindset shift for me is that legal fees are an investment.
Yes.
The same way that um, I might invest in branding or marketing insights or anything like that. Legal strategy is an investment as well because when you protect yourself from those risks and from those liabilities, that's ultimately going to increase your bottom line in the long run,
Yeah.
right? And it might not just be the avoidance of something that will sink your ship. It could literally, or in the case of the plane analogy, it could add wings to your plane, right? It could actually make it a better, more efficient plane. Right. So again, coming back to the idea of proactivity rather than damage control, it's not simply that we are, let's say, shielding your plane from like a potential, or like it's rather, it's not that we're just fixing like the wing when it breaks. It's
Right.
like we are super coating it so that it is resilient against
Mhm.
particular factors, right, that may be out of your
Right.
control.
And
So
that's,
that's
you talked about expenses versus investments too, and that was a shift for me. I always was like, oh man, that's so much money. That's so much money. But if I look at it as an investment into getting where we want to go as a company, I'm like, yep, here's my credit card.
yeah,
Do it.
yeah,
Just go for it.
yeah.
So,
Like, and a great example is staying in compliance, right? If you're a startup working with health clinics, and you're gonna have to be compliant with HIPAA regulations,
hmm,
and that can cost money, right? But the thing is, if you don't spend that money to be in compliance, then you're just not gonna be able to work with these health clinics legally anyway. And
right.
so that's gonna be a huge, right, segment of the market that you're just not hitting, that you're not even eligible to work with. So ultimately, those quote unquote expenses to stay in compliance, it's an investment to open up the world of possibilities that you
Right.
can explore if you are legally compliant.
Right. I want to pivot to AI a little bit because you and I had a real interesting conversation about this over coffee a couple months ago. And a lot of founders, I've brought people on the podcast before and we've talked about AI, but a lot of founders are now using AI tools to generate contracts, legal documents. I want to get your 2 cents on that. Where does that work well? Where can it actually be dangerous?
Yeah, definitely. It's a very relevant question, and I'll start by saying this. I'm not gonna sit here and say you should never ever use AI to generate a legal document, right? I'm not here saying that you're gonna cause a stock market crash if you do, right? And in fact, AI is slowly but surely improving at certain legal tasks, right? Especially the most cutting edge models. However, no matter how good it gets, it's definitely still a tool, and it's a tool that should be used with care. The same way that a sword should be handled by someone with training, with sharp objects and weapons, you know, AI is that powerful and more, which is why it's so important to have the proper context and understanding when you're using it. All
Yeah.
right. So on a very basic level, generative AI can very quickly and cheaply write an agreement or some other legal document. There's no one's questioning that. And it looks really good as well aesthetically.
Right.
But where it gets dangerous is that there are often holes, sometimes fatal holes that render a contract close to useless, right? So let's give an example, and this is actually one of the catalysts, like one of the moments when I realized that this is what I want to do, kind of for my career. I have several friends who are entrepreneurs, full time or part time, and a couple of them they had been coming to me with contracts asking me to review them. This is long before I started the firm, and I would look at it and just from first glance I was like, wow, I was impressed. I was like, whoa, this looks legit. And then I started reading it and I was like, oh, hold your horses, right? There's no jurisdiction, there's no choice of law, there's no alternative dispute resolution, right? So what you end up with is as good as a handshake and won't save you any money if you eventually have to fight over it in court, right?
Mhm.
One of the rules of thumb that I go by is that if there's any significant money involved, whatever that means to you, um, like obviously get it in writing first and foremost, but more so than that, the general recommendation is to spend 2 to 3% of your deal value on legal, right? So let's say you need to close a deal for 10 grand, it's probably worth spending a few hundred, right? 100 grand, it's probably worth spending a few grand to make sure everything is airtight legally. So it's like, yes, no one's gonna stop you from relying fully on ChatGPT to write you a contract, but ultimately, ChatGPT is not going to fight for you in court if something goes wrong. And so
Yep.
um, that's where if let's say your deal value is really just a few $100, then yeah, at that point maybe it's not worth getting a lawyer to look at it. It might just be better to use AI. But ultimately, that's kind of a judgment call, and that's a practical decision that you have to make, which is that anytime it becomes a more significant amount of money where you would actually lose sleep over it if the deal didn't go through, that's when, again, you can start with an AI draft. You can give that to a lawyer, and they could tell you either they're going to use that and make it more robust, or they might say, let's use a completely different template, let's use something else altogether. But that's where it really does become kind of critical to get a human lawyer or law firm involved.
Right. And it's going to make your life more difficult too if someone were to use AI for an, let's say it's an operating agreement, and then, oh, Lenny, I got to go to court. I need your help now. Here's all my AI produced documents.
Hmm.
It's going to make your life more difficult to try and defend whatever it
100%.
is you need. So
100%. Yeah.
yeah, that's tough. Many founders, we're kind of touching on kind of what we talked about earlier in the podcast, but many founders wait until something breaks before they call an attorney. When is the right time for entrepreneurs to start thinking about legal strategy?
As soon as you have the idea for your business, honestly, it's really never too early. And I don't mean to say that you have to think about it 24/7 or that it's your number one priority either, right?
Mhm.
For most founders, their their idea is really their priority and they want to just focus on that and build their strategy around it. But legal should still definitely be at least in the back of your mind. It should be in the conversation because let's just say at this point I'm thinking of someone who hasn't incorporated yet, right?
Mhm.
As we talked about a little bit earlier, you inherently need that legal entity in order to properly do business. So from that very early, like before you're even cash flowing, you're kind of deciding where to incorporate, what type of entity to use, These are all legal questions, really, and they're definitely intertwined with business. So this is actually an idea that I think a lot of people don't notice or appreciate, which is that like legal and business are so intertwined, right? It's very rare that you can look at an issue and say this is a pure legal issue or this is a pure business issue. There's so many situations in which they're really a mixed question of legal and business. So, right, because on a very basic level, every monetary transaction you perform comes with certain rights and obligations. So, in that sense, the contract is really formed before any money um, even exchanges hands, right? At the time that two people or two entities agree to exchange value, that could be services, goods, that could even be a promise. They've entered into a legal relationship, whether they know it or not. And
Right.
so, and that's just part of the reason why legal is so kind of built into the fabric of the business world. And so it's really never too early. That's kind of the um, takeaway there.
Okay. Yeah, and kind of leads into like my next question. So, entrepreneurship, it's risky, but legal risks feel different than business risks. And we all want to move fast in business. How should founders think about balancing speed with legal protection?
Yes, yes. And I've been there as well as someone with experience across many different ventures. Like we always just want to go, go, go and start cash flowing and start making money. And and by and large, I'm not against that idea, right?
Hmm.
It really is a balance at the end of the day. One of the things that people kind of stereotype about in-house lawyers, for example, is that they're kind of like they put the brake on things, right? The sales team, marketing team, or whatever other teams, they want to do something, and it's always the in-house legal team that's like, hold up, we got to think about this. And so there's definitely a grain of truth to that, you know, but I don't want to perpetuate the stereotype that legal just slows things down. I
Right.
think that with proper planning and looking ahead, legal doesn't really have to slow anything down, right? That more so happens when there's misalignment, when there's a lack of coherence between your again, your business plan, your legal plan, which in my mind really should all be the same plan. So if you know what's coming ahead, what you need to be compliant with, what changes when you start scaling, right? A lot of it is practical in nature. So there are certain things where you might say like technically this legal issue could be a problem, but when you're so small that it just doesn't make sense to slow things down over that issue. And just to be clear, I'm not encouraging any illegal activity, but
Yeah.
there's just a lot of things where it's not so simple as to say this is legal and this is illegal. It's more so there are a lot of risks that come with every decision that you make. And anytime you have a risk, you do have to keep in mind the reward. When that's out of balance, right? Again, like the premise of this question is kind of like, how do you balance speed with risk and execution? Ultimately, it does depend on the situation, where you're at in the business, whether you're cash flowing, whether you're scaling, right? All of these things matter and will factor into your overall strategy.
Right. Um, this is a big one. So I'm curious what you think. If you've noticed any patterns in the personalities of founders or partners who succeed versus those who struggle, um,
Yeah.
engaging you or not.
So I've seen many founders throughout my life, my friends, clients, just people I've seen on the internet. And the one trait that I see the most consistently, I would say is simply willingness to fail.
Mhm.
And you can cut that in a number of ways. You could say willingness to try and break things, willingness to learn. You could call it curiosity, growth mindset. These are all slightly different things, but ultimately get to the same point, which is that it's the persistence that will get you somewhere. From my vantage point, every successful business person that I've ever seen has failed more times than they've succeeded. In fact, they've failed more times than the average person has even tried something. And and why is that? Well, it's only by like experiencing things firsthand that you can see where the rubber meets the road, where things go wrong and where things go right. And if your entrepreneurial path is, let's just say, too smooth, for example, and you don't run into any roadblocks early on, that could actually be worse for you in the long run because when things do break, then you're gonna kind of feel lost, like you don't know what to do and you don't know what actually happens when things break and how to fix them. So I think it's really good for people to try a lot of things early on and just explore all the realms of
Yeah.
possibilities so that they understand, what it's like to fail and then what it's like to avoid all the ways in which things commonly break.
Yeah.
So, as far as personality, right? Every founder starts off with different personality traits, different risk appetite, different goals, right? Some people are all about the bag. Other people really want agency. And no, there's nothing wrong with any one path or another, right? But ultimately, the ones who succeed they can look different in a lot of ways, but from my experience, the one thing they do have in common is a robust capacity for the trait of being willing to fail.
Yeah. 100%. 100%. Tell our audience here in the Entrepreneur Lounge where they can find you.
Yeah, so you can reach us at Lenny at sun-law.com or our website sun-law.com. And you can feel free to find me on LinkedIn at Lenny Sun. We're on a lot of different platforms, so feel free to reach out if you have any questions. And I'm always happy to chat just as a friend, as a mentor, an advisor. So, really, it's all is fair game.
Love that. And you're doing a 30, I saw your 30-day post challenge that you're doing. Tell us about that.
Yes, so I have currently missed about half of those days. But I've definitely enjoyed kind of pushing myself, and I was almost like 100% sure in my mind that I wasn't gonna make it all 31 days. So I did kind of want to see how long it lasted. And I think I've done about 8 or 9 out of the 17. But hey, I might go and post about this right after we get off. So
There you go.
back on
There you go.
track.
I'll give you some cut ups and you can schedule some posts so it takes care of a few days for
Oh,
you.
beautiful.
There you go. All right, Lenny. Well, hey, I appreciate your time coming on, and yeah, we'll get this out soon, and so the Entrepreneur Lounge and people that are following the Entrepreneur Lounge can get to know you a little bit better.
Awesome. Thanks so much, Garrett. This was a blast, and
Awesome,
hope to see you soon.
awesome. Thanks, Lenny.
Okay, take care.